What's going on, YouTube? And welcome back to the Black Honor Movement. Before we get started, let's get the housekeeping items out the way. Please comment your thoughts and ideas from the content we're going to share today. And also hit that like button, that share button, and that subscription button. Besides that, let's get started. Today we're talking about Martin Luther King, civil rights, modern society in general, and the powers that be. Let's keep it short to respect everybody's time, but please go ahead, like I said, hit that like button and that share button. All right, so the one thing that we need to consider is it's no longer enough for those who desire dominion over our lives to enslave us and our bodies through a corrupt economic front, as well as military institutions and the military industrial complex, as well as the prison industrial complex. But the unethical people that have done this thus far now seek to enslave our minds. And what we have to understand is it's our own human weakness that makes mind control even possible. But with that being said, it's up to us to free ourselves from not only political, but exopolitical and external controls that impose us forces, through what we were talking about earlier, which is a Black Honor movement and rights movement, while at the same time working to be more righteous people, more ethical people in our approach, and more strategized in our approach. A lot of us talk about that within the community, but it's definitely time for us to make that impact. So let's talk about it one last time as we strategize what we want to do moving forward. There's a lot to come from this channel, and there's a lot to come from what we say we represent, right? So besides that, we know that both the means and the end are the same. So we can only make a realistic means to free ourselves from the situations that we constantly find ourselves facing in America, especially as Black people. Within that, we also have to consider that the largest and most successful movements have funding and various financial backing. Hold on, I'm not asking for any resources from you guys, but I want you to consider this. After recent scandals like Black Lives Matter, Black people, indigenous people, we have to start to consider the motives of those and our allies who want to join and fund our movements. That's what we're talking about. So today we're going to discuss the history of the civil rights era and the consequences of allowing the enemy to infiltrate our organizations, as well as how we should better get more organized. And I think we touched on a few of those points already, because we also have to consider that some people are outright genuine. Some people are outright allies to us, but also some people are puppets. And the ones who are puppets, who is the puppet being controlled by? It's a term that comes to mind when I think about things like who's controlling the puppet. And as we see in the community or in the TV right now, we've all been where Kanye West is right now. We've all awakened to who we are. We're watching the richest Black man in America awaken to who he is as Black people, biblically and historically. And it's like a cherry being popped. It's disruptive. But it's also societies that work very hard to make sure that we never wake up. And a lot of people know about the Jesuit, tongue twister, but the Jesuit society, right? The Society of Christ. Let me change the screen. Got a new setup with OBS, but we're gonna skip some of my notes and let me pull this up. But when you look up the Superior General of the Society of Jesus, this is pretty much where the term the Jesuit comes from, right? But who we're talking about is the Black Pope. The Black Pope is pretty much like the general of the Jesuit society. They say that this guy is currently the Black Pope. I really don't keep up with that much, but I do know, what this Jesuit, tongue twister again, what the Jesuit society is capable of. When we consider people like this, we have to consider what these people are capable of, right? Within the world, right? And The Jesuit society, the Jesuit general, right? They exercise full and complete power over that society's order, right? He meets with his people, just like anybody would meet with their subordinates. But when they decide to start a war, I know a lot of people have heard the term George Soros, right? And a lot of people have heard that a lot of the banks have funded both sides of these wars. And I mean, who else is going to pay for the military industrial complex if it's not the loans from these banks? But anyway, they get information about how to, within the ranks, they either get or give information about how to best go about certain things, how to best destabilize a country. I mean, that is what the CIA is known for. That's why they have no jurisdiction within the United States. And pretty much number one objective is to protect the U.S. and destabilize another country if it means the success of our country. So, when we look at, aggregations from groups like this, we have to consider monumental events within our history, especially as Black people. So we want to take a deeper look at the 1964 Civil Rights Act. If we look at the longtime president of the University of Notre Dame, Theodore Heisberg, he was the Black Pope of the society we were reviewing earlier. So when we speak about Black Pope, what is that term? That's pretty much a derogatory term given to the superior general of the Jesuits themselves. But the Jesuits, they never call, that general the Black Pope. They would just call him the superior general. But just society has come up with that term, the Black Pope. And the reason why they came up with the term is because obviously most of them were Black, worn by the members of the society, including the superior general. You can look at a few pictures if you just Google Black Pope, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But when we take a look at, people from the civil rights era, one cannot ignore Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was definitely a threat to the establishment. We all know that. But the people who allied with Martin Luther King, funded Martin Luther King, a lot of those people, they were playing both sides of the fence. And Martin Luther King wasn't a threat to the establishment simply because he had a revolutionary idea within the civil rights movement. But he also opposed the war at the time, which was the Vietnam War. Why? Blacks were heavily being drafted into the Vietnam War at a disproportional rate than our counterparts within the community. So as a civil rights advocate, Martin Luther King spoke against that. One of the things that I found interesting from Martin Luther King is the fact that he said, it's very tough trying to captivate an audience and make them pay attention to certain things when the country is at war. And if you think about the scandal with Black Lives Matter, for example, at a time that Russia's amassing at Ukraine's border, and we're talking about dirty bombs and stuff like that, it's very tough to talk about the things that plague the Black community at the time where no one knows if whose hands on the button or what's going to happen the next day or the stock market is crashing. It's very tough to captivate the attention of your people when all of these things are happening to our community on top. And of course, the common term that people like to say is, when white people catch the sniffles, Black people catch pneumonia. And that's very true. So if you have pneumonia, how are you able to pay attention at a time of having pneumonia? Something to think about, and then Martin Luther King's objection to the Vietnam War. Again, we spoke about it not being so much on geopolitical issues, but rather it was racial equality. And at that time, our country, when we still had a military draft, like we spoke about earlier, disproportionate number of Black males, particularly in the South, were being drafted in lieu to white men. So at the same time, King was also opposed to the disproportionate number of soldiers who were being sent to Vietnam, not only being drafted, but being sent to Vietnam. And his objections to the Vietnam War was dangerous to the establishment being able to captivate so many people as he did, throughout his time. Dr. Martin Luther King, he also drew the attention of J. Edgar Hoover and was allegedly spied on by the FBI. Not even allegedly, they have documents on it. He was illegally spied on by the FBI. And then when you consider that, you also have to consider, J. Edgar Hoover, he removed Dr. King's bodyguards, at least allegedly, and accounts show that he removed Dr. Martin Luther King's bodyguards shortly after his assassination. And of course, the powers that be, the establishment, they would have us believe that this was just a coincidence, but it's not. This is strategic planning and movement. One thing I want to comment on is, if I was living in the civil rights era, I would honestly be for segregation, and I'm gonna tell you why. My grandfather, he was drafted to the Vietnam War. He caught Agent Orange, and he died early because of Agent Orange. It gave him cancer. What's Agent Orange? Agent Orange is a pesticide that America used. Let me pull it up for you. Let me see. Agent Orange. But yeah, Agent Orange is a pesticide that the American government used in the Vietnam War. And what they did was they wanted to be able to see the enemies who was hiding behind the bushes and things like that in Vietnam. So they would spray these chemicals here, and you see the birth defects of a lot of Vietnamese citizens, since they would spray these pesticides to be able to kill the plant life and see the enemy. Now, a lot of our soldiers, a lot of our American soldiers, they caught cancer. My grandfather specifically caught cancer from Agent Orange and died an early death, died a painful death, having a 4A, I think, lung cancer. And also studies showed that white soldiers were compensated more than African American soldiers. And I can tell you, all of those trips to the VA hospital, my grandfather spending his life savings on dermo, chemotherapy, all of these different treatments. He spent almost all of his life savings, left my grandmother a widow after being drafted into a war that he really didn't even want to go into in the first place. Right? So in addition to that, we see our progressive black leadership. They were assassinated for speaking out against the war, speaking out against the order that the establishment wanted to come out with. And the reason why I said, using my grandfather's example again, the reason why I said I would have been for segregation is, look at all of the inventions, all of the education we got when our communities were segregated. Now, when we have this inclusive spirit, it's almost like saying, hey, you no longer have to live outside. Come inside. Live with us. Put your money in here with us. We'll add you to the finances. No problem. We'll treat you like one of the house members, even though we treat you like crap. We'll treat you like one of the house members. But in addition to that, you only get the office closet. That's your whole community. And we got to put all of our stuff in it, and all of the immigrant stuff in your community. And that's where you live, in the office closet. So you get the tiniest spot in the home. You still have the history of foul treatment, of unethical treatment, of persecution, of oppression, in an inclusive package. And then we see the funding for the community is split amongst minorities instead of descendants of slaves that built this country, with separate packaging for other ethnic groups for what they deserve as well. So something to think about. But we also have to consider this. When we speak about the military industrial complex, the Vietnam War was a huge cash cow for the establishment, for the powers that be, for the elite. Because in areas of control of oil, weaponry development, We saw the pesticide development. There was a lot of testing. It's always testing and advancements being done during times of war. It's the prison industrial complex or the military industrial complex first, then the commercial industrial complex or the consumer industrial complex second. Need proof? Security cameras. Where did you find security cameras before you could order them off Amazon for a very low price? You found them in prisons. Drones. Where did you find drones before you had to spend $1,000 on one doing what the CIA and the Army was all right. And the Air Force was already doing? Unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, right? And now we're, surveying land with it. We surveyed land overseas with them too, before they were allowed in America, before they were greenlit to be sold. I can't believe I said sold to the general public, right? So no one, not even Martin Luther King, Kanye West, nobody is going to interfere with powers that be right to wage war for profit, right? Then you also take a look at a few people that Dr. Martin Luther King had around him, bless his heart. But if you take a look at this right here, this school, who is this? Dr. Martin Luther King, right? Right? This was a school for communists. This was a school for communists in Tennessee, right? The Highlander School. It was a school for communists. So African Americans, black people, Israelites, children of God, we have to pay attention to where we're receiving our funding from. We really do. We have to look at this. We have to pay attention to where we receive the Highlander Research and Educational School, Folk Alliance, International Lifetime. Socialism is very close to communism, my friend. And when you look at people like Dr. Martin Luther King, who the powers that be don't want him to have the power that he has as progressive black leadership within the community, of course the FBI is going to track things like this. At the time of a Vietnam War, tensions with Russia, socialism is very close to communism. The children of Marxism. That's what BLM is. The founders of BLM are proud, self-proclaimed Marxists. That's what communism is. So when we surround ourselves with quote unquote allies, do they have our best interests at heart? And what is their motive? Right? So Dr. Martin Luther King, he was heavily surveillanced by the FBI. The FBI's investigation had Lee J. Edgar Hoover, I know you guys are all familiar with him, to say that Dr. King was a tomcat with obsessive, degenerate sexual urges. And President Lyndon B. Johnson called him a hypocrite preacher. Now, along the years of our lives, we've all heard those terms. Who told us that? And where did it come from? Another person that comes to mind was a known communist at the time was Stanley Davis Leveson, right? He was also investigated by the FBI. Yes, go ahead and look him up. But something I wanted to show you guys. Bear with me. Yeah. This is a report from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that shows more of Dr. Martin Luther King's alleged sexual relationships with different women. Of course, again, I'm not shading Dr. Martin Luther King. Like I said, a lot of us have heard stories throughout our childhood and young adult life of him supposedly cheating on his wife. But this is just where it's come from, right? Decades old FBI files, right? A lot of information to pay attention to when we do our own research. Unfortunately, we all know the term that the bad term that you want to hide anything from a black man, put it in a book. But is it true? How much research do we do? History repeats itself. When are we going to learn from our mistakes? We don't need to allow people like this to infiltrate our organizations. Dr. Martin Luther King did a lot for black people. He should be honored amongst and revered amongst black people. But we also should learn from his mistakes because the guy wasn't perfect. Sorry, my beard is tickling my nose and I'm trying to record. Anyway, so yeah, we looked at the alleged connections with over 60 Communist Front organizations that Dr. Martin Luther King had ties with from these FBI files as they lead to. But think about it. In the 1960s, I was a black man going to afford touring the United States. Where was the funding come from? In a racially divided America, where was the money coming from? But also, again, we have to pay attention to where the money was coming from. Where was the money coming from with Black Lives Matter? George Soros comes to mind. But anyway, 9 of Dr. Martin Luther King's closest aides were high-ranking, communist activists within America at that time, and later became the aide to Reverend Jesse Jackson. So we spoke about Reverend Jesse Jackson, Stanley Levinson. I'll list a few more in the description section of this video, but let's move on because we're almost done. So, when we speak about more of what Dr. Martin Luther King did for America, for Black America, let's also look at this as well. He fought hard for civil liberties of our people. And in retaliation, the FBI launched the anti-King campaign, right? For those who were alive in those times, or those who've done their research, which that campaign may have been the reason why he died. And the entire civil rights and anti-war movements may have been a reason why he was assassinated, because he was very anti-war, and that's okay to be anti-war. It doesn't mean that he was a communist because he's anti going to war with the communist nation. And, he's getting funding from various organizations within America, and things like that. But those groups told him, preach peace, right? He had people in his ear. And he also, if you look up his interview with MSNBC, he said he realized he led his people into a burning building. It's a lot to analyze here, right? And also we look at the FBI's COINTELPRO and the CIA's Operation Chaos. The system, the powers that be, they're not going to let anything stop, defame them from what they're trying to do. And they won't stop at anything themselves to defame and even assassinate those who resist such enslavement, right? So rational self-reliance and an understanding of how the human mind works is the best protection against invisible and spiritual warfare. We shouldn't just rely on authority. And obedience to authority is the first act of submission to suggestibility, right? And suggestibility is the first step to surrendering ourselves to said mind control. And if it isn't true for you, it just isn't true, right? Your own integrity to yourself, your own self-integrity is your best hope. Let's move on. We're almost done. Allegedly, Dr. Martin Luther King was killed in part of the civil rights movement in order to stop progressive black leadership. But if we look at, people like Robert Kennedy, with his political ambitions, he ultimately paid the price himself as well, for ignoring the warnings within our community, right? White people as well have been assassinated along the years of trying to stop the powers that be from, obtaining their objectives. But we have to also consider that we still have not been organized. I mean, it's always been just one guy standing up for all of us. We spoke about COINTELPRO. I want to show you something in reference to COINTELPRO. Let me see something here. Yeah, so when we look at COINTELPRO, you know, we look up what was the purpose of COINTELPRO. According to FBI documents, one of the purposes of COINTELPRO program was to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, and otherwise neutralize the activities of black nationalists. Do we not see this today? Do we not see this today, my friends? Yes, we do. A few examples of COINTELPRO I wanted to show you, but I guess I don't have it up right now. But yeah, I mean, we see it all throughout. We see it all throughout history that this is a part of the machine that our people have been fighting, right? We see all throughout history that this is a part of the machine that our people have been fighting, right? So yeah, let's get back to it, man. Well, you know what? I think that pretty much covers everything. So we'll go ahead and end it here. But thank you guys again for tuning in to the Black Honor Movement. Again, we changed the name from This Is Spiritual to the Black Honor Movement because within our movement that we are forming right now, we will talk about spiritual warfare. We will talk about financial warfare and all of the oppression that our people continue to face. So I thought it was a upgrade in the name change, and it's more of who we are. So again, thank you guys for tuning in. Again, hit that like button, that share button, comment if you've learned something today, and I hope you have a wonderful finish to your evening, your day. Get started, whatever you're doing. Rock out, man. And thank you guys again for tuning in to the Black Honor Movement, and I'll catch you in the next video. Peace.